Serious, have you ever known someone who's gone missing? If so, what's the story? A woman who was friend with my grandmother. She disappeared for 4 years. Until her husband died in an accident. The man was extremely violent. And it was a time when abuse was not taken seriously. Marital rape wasn't even a thing in the law. So, not seeing any solution, the woman left. And only came back when the news that her husband died reached her. A crazy woman did this in my village in the 70s. Her husband was a notoriously abusive alcoholic. She somehow got herself to a metropolitan city, found herself a job, and came back once it was clear her husband was about to kick it. He had squandered almost all the wealth and land that came down to him through his father, and blamed her for not having children. She saw to it to get whatever was left, sold it to other relatives, and left for good. After his death, last I heard, she's still alive, never married or had children, but taking care of herself in her late 70s. The best I understand, she took the help of her younger brother to get out. He'd be 10 or so then. I imagine the kid stole something from the family for his sister, and he was the POC to the village. Think of a time when there was no telephones. She got him out as well. He went on to move to Europe. The brother-sister bond is something that stood out to me. The reason why they're both alive and well is because she sacrificed her life for him, and he has paid it in kind. Bought her a house. Her family shunned her for leaving. Her brother left because she was shunned. Even today she's told as the villain of the story, not the survivor. Woman is a true feminist icon. I hope they make a short movie about her and pound that shit into my backward ass thinking village's head. A guy from my high school disappeared while hiking. His body wasn't found until almost 10 years later. Geez, I can't imagine how his family felt, having to wait that long for closure. A girl that transferred into our high school around 10th grade just up and disappeared one weekend without any real trace. Many weeks later, it turned out she had left town to meet a guy she met on AOL See Kids. AOL used to. Classic story. He was much older. She was underage. They actually stayed together, and the girl's family ended up coming around to accepting it. Really weird. What made it even weirder for me is that I was not friends with this girl, but she lived in my neighborhood. Years later, my mom had become friends with the girl's mom, and my mom found out that the girl told her parents for months that she was on the phone or roaming me anytime she was talking to the older man. Her parents eventually realized she and I were never communicating, but since we were the same age, I was unknowingly her cover story for months. To this day, I've still never had an actual conversation with this girl. Really weird finding out that I had been her fake boyfriend all those years prior. I went to the same elementary school as Michael Dunahy. He was kidnapped off the playground and still not found to this day. I remember after it happened every parent showed up to walk the entire school of kids home. I also remember running ahead of the pack for whatever reason, and all the parents were screaming at me to get back. They were terrified. My cousin never came home from school one afternoon. She was only 12 at the time, so it was unusual. Her body was later found in the woods. A family friend saw her walking home from school, told her he'd give her a ride home. He instead took her to the woods to rape and murder her. The sick bastard helped looking for her as well. If you live in Tajikistan, you're going to know at least one kid that went missing and got murdered. Had a friend in high school who had seriously strict parents. He really wasn't a bad kid at all, just doing the normal stuff we all were doing, but his parents decided he needed to go to some kind of military boarding school. We wrote to each other, but it kind of trickled off as a couple of years went by. He came back to our town, and we hung out a little, but then he was gone and no one ever heard of him again, including his family. I still think of him to this day. This was the mid-late 70s. Had a co-worker employee in high school who went missing for 3 days. Turned out he'd gone out for a walk without telling anyone. A tree had fallen on him, and he'd been unable to free himself. He was dehydrated and obviously shaken when they found him, but he recovered and came back to work a few days later. My friend's boyfriend in high school. The two boys got along like peanut butter and jelly. The boyfriend came out to his parents after their 6-month anniversary. They locked him in the house for a week. No school, no phone, no texts. He read the Bible every day. When they took him to church to ask about conversion camps, he ran off. They found him a week later hanging from a tree not far from his grandparents' place. The town found out what happened after the parents were investigated. My friend had to leave school for a month to get help. He was never the same. The last time he saw his boyfriend was the night he came out. This is happening to a close friend of mine right now. She is 19 and still living with her parents. They are keeping her in the house and emotionally abusing, sometimes physically her. She goes to work, sees some friends, but stays with them at home. They will kick her out if she doesn't go to church. She is so depressed she can't even get out of this situation. I can't do a thing as I live on the other side of the country. Once they find out she's gay, it's over for her. Half brother. He went missing after going out on the lake with a friend's boat and his girlfriend. It had started raining and storming, and the boat tipped over. His girlfriend made it back to shore. He didn't. They took 2 days to find him. They dragged the lake for his body. He was eventually found dead, washed up on the shore somewhere along the tree line of the lake. This just happened recently. A friend of mine, when we were teenagers, struggled with addiction, but overcame it and moved across the country and was working as an outreach worker and helping others overcome addiction and homelessness. I guess COVID made her spiral back into addiction and she went missing, and they ended up finding her body in a ravine and they think it was human trafficking related. It's now being treated as a homicide. My mom has gone missing a few times. She's bipolar and has hallucinations, and when it gets bad she will just disappear. Once she moved to Kentucky without telling anyone, and a few times we've called the police, and they found her sleeping in her truck in various places like the state forest or some public places like that. Honestly, the biggest fear is that she'll be found somewhere having committed suicide. My neighbor's wife disappeared one day, then they found out the husband cooked her in their restaurant for 3 days. He drained the liquids into the grease trap and threw the bones into the garbage. Never found those, but he kept her skull for his mom's attic. He got a new girlfriend within weeks of his wife's disappearance, and when he noticed the cops following him on a drive with his girlfriend, he confessed everything to her, stopped the car, and jumped off a huge cliff, and lived. When they asked him why he killed her, he just said she was too loud. Back in 2017, my grandfather went missing. He walked pretty much everywhere and rarely stayed home if he didn't have to. So when he told my grandmother he was going to get a haircut, all she said was to drive, since it was raining. But he didn't come home. My grandmother called my dad. She lived in Washington state, and we are in Florida, and he immediately called the police department up there, booked the soonest flight, and went to help search. It took a couple days, but they found his car about 80 miles from their house, on the side of the ride near a rather steep hillside in the bay. The police searched the car, but found nothing suspicious. Though they didn't find him, the area his car was found was too steep to properly walk down. Dogs struggled to get down there. According to Dad, it was bizarre. A few weeks later, his body washed up about a mile from where his car was, but it was missing parts, specifically his leg. His leg ended up washing up on that beach in Canada that has feet show up randomly. We knew it was his because he wears a very specific type of orthopedic shoe. We still have no idea what happened to him. Another odd part was that during this, my sister was a junior in HS and was in anthropology class. Teacher pulled up an article about that beach and the photo they used in the article was grandpa's foot. My sister told her teacher, "I think that's my grandfather's." But she wasn't sure because my parents hadn't told her. Her teacher called my mom because he thought she was just being inappropriate, who had to explain that no, she was right. About 15 years ago, my uncle drove up from Arizona with his 3 kids to Illinois where my family and grandma lived. He stayed the weekend at my grandma's and was supposed to stay another week before heading back to Arizona, but then left in the middle of the night on a Sunday without a word. He did, however, leave a note saying he wouldn't be back and my grandma was to take care of the kids. None of us, not even his kids or ex-wife, heard or saw anything about him until 2 years ago when my mom found him on Facebook. Apparently he moved to the Philippines with some Filipino woman and started a new family there. My grandfather. He was a deadbeat dad, drinking all his money and making my mother and grandma suffer a lot. He was violent and used to cheat on my grandma with several women. One day he didn't come after work to the house for about 15 years. Turns out he had won a lottery prize during the 70s and moved to Brazil without telling anybody. My grandma only got a letter a year later saying that she should meet him in Brazil, but my grandma ignored him and married the man she spent her whole life with. Funny enough, he came back during the 90s completely broke and with a debt with some Brazilian mafia dudes. My mom told him to beat it, and he threatened us to sell the house unless we welcomed him back in the family. Little did he know that my grandma actually bought back the house from the bank, so he spent the rest of his short remaining life as a homeless man. I had an employee, Jason, that had worked for us for 6 years. 4 of those directly reporting to me. He was a pretty good worker and a nice guy. One day, a police officer came to our office and said he was looking for Jason. Jason was scheduled off. The officer said, "Jason has a warrant for an unpaid traffic violation. No big deal. He was just wanted to come down to the court building and make arrangements to take care of the legal issue." The next day, we told Jason what had happened. He asked me if he could clock out right then and go down and settle it immediately. I said sure. So he went. Later that same day, he came back to work saying it was all taken care of. Maybe a month went by, and then another officer showed up looking for Jason. The next time Jason was scheduled, I told him another cop came by. He said he had worked out a payment plan for the fine and had forgotten to make the payment. He again asked me if he could leave to take care of it. He left. I never saw him again. Ever. We called the jails in the area to see if they had him. No. We eventually got in touch with his ex. She said that she was looking for him too and hadn't seen him. To this day I don't really know what happened or where he went. Online searches have not turned up anything. He has a pretty common name, so it's like a needle in a haystack. It seemed like a simple traffic fine was hardly a reason to abandon a good job, but we may never know. My cousin went missing in late 2017. While living with my dad, he just took my dad's car and disappeared. My dad went missing after driving away drunk after a fight with my mom. He was an alcoholic and they would fight when he got drunk. 10 days later, a fisherman caught him. Turns out he had driven into the river and was too drunk to get out of the car. He left my mom alone with a 7-year-old and 1-year-old. I'm just glad his drunk ass didn't take anyone with him. Several years ago, a friend's boyfriend went on a hike in the Cascade Mountains. It was late September, which a time of year where the weather conditions can flip at a moment's notice. His hiking buddy said that one minute they were walking and talking, then all of a sudden he looked behind him and realized he was alone. We organized search parties for weeks, but no trace was ever found. The only thing that makes sense is that the guy lost his footing and slid down the mountain, but no one could find evidence of a slide or damaged vegetation. I still wonder if the guy chose to disappear in order to avoid some kind of debt. Worked at a company where I got real close to the 2 owners. Very odd relationship, but it worked. They had a third business partner who left due to mental illness. He'd pop in every so often and cash a check despite selling his shares, ownerships, etc. They still gave him a fairly decent wage for doing nothing. Chill guy. Name was Simon. Long story short, we all went to Amsterdam for a few days to let off steam after a grueling quarter. Had a hangover-esque night out. Woke up to no Simon. Searched high and low. Informed the local police after 24 hours and booked a few extra nights in hopes he'd turn up again. Never did. Booked another 2 nights. Still no luck. Left for home and informed his family and opened inquiries with the police back in the UK. 3 weeks after returning, Simon's wife received a voicemail from a private number, muffled along the lines of "in trouble. Can't come home." They're on to me. This led to some extreme days of questioning at a local drunk tank, but nothing heard from after a further 6 weeks. Case closed. No new evidence, etc. Tried to appeal and got shut down. Dude just left, clearly didn't die. Creepy voicemail, but hasn't been heard of since. 2 kids as well. Such a shame. Really booked me out for a while. My brother's middle school teacher. He just didn't show up to school one day, which was very unusual. The school scrambled to find a substitute for him because they had no notice. We had a whole school meeting like 2 days later when he was officially missing, where they told us all about it. He left the house that morning as usual. According to his wife later said, he was never seen again. Many search parties were organized and people looked for months, but they never found him. He is still officially missing today. I can't get very detailed, but my friend's teenage son went missing. The son was a sports star, great kid, had scholarships to his college of choice, was in the top 10% of the student body, etc. He was gone for a week, and the whole community really rallied to look for him. Unfortunately, it came to light that 2 of his friends were actually sick shits. He had become a star student when they went to high school, but his 2 friends from elementary school didn't. They had gotten increasingly more jealous of his loving parents, stable finances, scholarships, grades and praise, until they decided to kill him. They had planned their friend's murder, carried it out, hidden his body, then helped look for him, all while knowing he was dead. Their Facebook messages to one another revealed the truth after about a week, and it wasn't long until his body was found.